everyone, and welcome to the Forensic Focus podcast. Today we have with us Nick Furneaux, very well known in the UK and apparently quite well known abroad now. I see from the fact that you're consulting for American companies and doing international lectures and all sorts of things. But well known in the UK for his forensic work. He's worked in some forensic software development and is well known in the cryptocurrency world, and so we're gonna talk about a lot of that. But the reason that we do know each other, we've met before, we've somewhere. I have very little recollection of where, probably F3 or something like that. But anyway, we've met before. But you popped up in my LinkedIn feed because you've got a new book out. And you yourself admit that it's a clickbait title from your talks, but it's a good clickbait title because it's entirely true, and it's that there's no such thing as cryptocrime, and we'll come to that in a minute. But just before we get to that, just tell us about yourself a little bit, how you got into this crazy and lovable world we like to call digital forensics.
Oh my goodness! You know, there's sort of lots of ways of telling the same story. Really, I mean, I in my CV that the police always look at and sort of curl their nose up at. You know, I always say that I was playing with computers since I was about 12 years old. Had a ZX81, you know, Sinclair with a 16K RAM pack that you had to hold on with Velcro. So there will be people that remember that who are of a certain age, and I have always just enjoyed tinkering with computers. I don't enjoy being in the limelight, actually. So I don't mind this terribly because it's just you and me. But even though I've spent, I don't know, more hours than I care to remember on conference stages and panels and training, I've trained thousands of police officers in different forms of forensics, specifically memory forensics and cryptocurrency investigations. So I'd always been playing with computers. I then I fell into forensics. I'm not going to do the boring story, but we were sort of writing tools for the covert extraction of data for those types of people that would need to do such things. And that then sort of led us into the more computer forensic-y stuff. I found myself in Florida, at the University of Florida, a large number of years ago now. I was a much younger man with a terrific guy called Professor Hanif Lachman, who was head of physics actually at University of Florida. And he showed me this thing that at the time was called expert witness, which of course in no time at all became NCASE. And he was on Clinton's task force for education at the time or something, and they were involved in, you know, the investigation of computer crime and how we could do online training when we had 28K modems and all this sort of stuff. And I remember looking at Expert Witness thinking, this is ace. I want to do more of this. And then I found, you know, people like F3 eventually. And but I've always been a little bit sort of left of centre. Some people will remember Helix. It was written by Drew Fahey. Drew and I became, good friends back in the day. We were teaching the Helix course, so that sort of live forensic analysis. I remember speaking at F3 with Jim Gordon. Some people might remember Jim, West Mercia Police, about doing live forensics on a live running machine. And I remember the old guard sat at the front with their arms firmly crossed.
Tony and Brian there.
These men are and were giants in helping us form process. And, you know, if anyone did, you know, the old sort of Cranfield take the 3.5-inch floppy disk apart sort of thing, you know, and find your way through it. But I was much more interested in the analysis of live machines, because of course that's where I sort of come with the sort of the covert data extraction stuff. That was the interest. What can we get from a live running machine? Which then took me into memory analysis, because we started pulling memory from machines using Helix, and then some people remember me from teaching memory analysis, volatility, memory analysis, and that sort of thing. Which sort of then, if you just want me to sort of square the circle, brings me up to about 2015, And good friend of mine, good forensic investigator, I won't say where, but from a police force in the UK, called me and said, we've got a computer here with Bitcoin on it. How do we carve the Bitcoin off? And I thought to myself, that is such a logical question for a forensic person to ask, but absolutely the wrong question. And if you don't know why that's the wrong question, go and do some training, read a book or something. I thought, this is probably something we should try and build some training around. Started to get a few sort of cryptocurrency oriented cases in, started working with some of the big companies like Chainalysis at the time. And in 2017, my mum got really ill and died, and I didn't feel like working. So Wiley had been chasing me, the publisher in the US, to write something. And I thought, I'll write something about cryptocurrencies. That'll be good. And so 2018 published Investigating Cryptocurrencies. And my entire life then went hard right into the investigating of crimes that involve the use of crypto. And 6 years on, in some ways, nothing has changed. In other ways, everything has changed, and it was time for a new one. So the new book, There's No Such Thing as Cryptocrime, much, much longer, almost double the size, and written for a much broader audience. Is that a sort of a fair CV?
It's a wonderful précis, yes, absolutely. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's the way the industry has changed in the time that I've been in it has gone from that concern about dead forensics to through live forensics and memory analysis through to things that don't even exist on the computer anymore and are now somewhere floating in the ether in blockchains and in
actually, so don't get me wrong on this. I do no harm forensics is always what you're aiming for. You're always aiming to make as few changes as possible. But I always used to argue, you say, but you pull the plug on a computer and you're going to lose, there's some registry keys that won't update and this. And I would say, yeah, but you've just deleted 4 gig of memory.
Yeah.
Yes, but you can't get anything out of memory. And of course, that proved to be utterly untrue. So there is no way of steady state forensics, do no harm forensics, because when you kill the power, you eradicate, now on what most machines, probably 16 gig of intelligence and evidence. So, you should always make as few changes as you can. But I was very much of the opinion that we did some work one point, and we found that actually pulling the plug on a machine made very little change to the hard drive, really, just stuff that hadn't updated, page file stuff and that sort of malarkey. But obviously you killed everything in the memory. Now, if you left the machine running, as long as you didn't suddenly have antivirus run or this was some terrorism suspect with a kill switch on their computer, actually plugging in a USB key made a couple of updates to a few registry keys. Not too much, few other little bits. I think we were looking at something like 128K of changes in order to plug in a USB key and run a command line tool. It was very, very, very small. And for me, the offset of the risk of keeping a machine running and taking your 8 gig of memory and having then the skills to be able to acquire, to be able to drag all the amazing evidence and intelligence you can get out of memory, or certainly could, is getting harder. It was always worth that offset for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's enshrined in the ACPO guidelines, isn't it? Which is fundamentally is don't change anything, but if you do, then tell us what you've changed and at least know what you're doing. And if you're making a conscious choice at that point, then it's a win. And like you say, if you're picking up 8 gig of additional network connections, passwords, unencrypted files, it's a huge amount of additional information that can add to a case.
But I always argue with the traditional forensics. You do no harm. But there's no way of entering a crime scene and not making changes to it.
Well, this is it. It's
none at all.
In meat space forensics, and this is a phrase that makes some of my colleagues wince, but in meat space forensics, you know, there are DNA exclusions. You send your lab techs in, and they're all excluded by DNA, which is great if you've committed murder, I guess. But
Good thinking.
but you know, so it's that known change. It is that. And if we're saying effectively we're just going to remove our DNA from that scene and look at everything else, then you know we're no worse than any other traditional forensic science.
No, but I'm sure it is still a debate of interest, and of course it's getting harder. You know, as machines now are almost all encrypted now, and it is getting a little bit harder to, you know, get to live running machines and to be able to extract memory. Memory is becoming a little bit more tricky to analyze, and so you know we may go around in a big circle.
Well, it's the perennial. Every time we make a better mousetrap, nature makes a better mouse, isn't it? And it's the same. Is that we'll find a loophole in something, and then somebody will close it because it's a. I mean, to be fair, it's a security issue. If you can do it, it's a security issue. My background was information security before this, so I'm rapidly trying to close up all of the things that other people were finding as ways of getting data out of stuff. In similar organisations to you, just on the other side of the desk. So yeah.
It's an interesting one, Simon, because it is tricky, this whole sort of do no harm thing. What can we? So I'm staring into. It looks like I'm looking at something, doesn't it? Actually, I'm just being thoughtful. That's probably a tell that when I'm looking, I look up to my left or something.
It is. It's looking up to your left as you're telling the truth, and looking up to the right as you're constructing a lie or something. I don't recall.
That's
but
right. That's interesting, actually, because if I look to the right, I don't feel as comfortable. There's definitely something. Somebody would build something into that. So or read something into my personality. Anyway, let's move on from that. Let's not worry about it.
Yeah, so obviously you've pivoted and or I'm sure there's still plenty of normal forensics around what your cryptocurrency cases are.
Actually, that is a really good question in its own right. We have a real problem at the moment, and this actually is something that if there is a community of forensics people that are listening to this, there's 3 parts to an investigation that includes a cryptocurrency. And the one that everyone thinks about is the middle one, which is track and trace. So everyone's into following the funds on the blockchain. Where have they gone? Going to an off-ramp, going to an exchange, finding an attributed address. And yeah, this is all really, really good. But that's only one of 3. And the first one is discovery. And I remember a couple of years ago talking to a very senior police officer from a country in South America, saying, have you started buying tools in like TRM Labs, who I represent a few days a week, and others? And he was like, no, we don't come across it. No, we don't see crypto at all. And the only reason, when the rest of the world is seeing it in almost every criminal category, is they simply weren't looking. And we do have a problem at the moment in that there aren't really, how can I put this sort of nicely? There aren't really any tools that define themselves on discovering crypto use and extracting the appropriate intelligence and evidential stuff, from a phone, from a hard drive at that discovery level. Now, don't get me wrong, magnets, tools are always really good, and they do a little bit. And, I was sort of kicking Jad, everyone knows Jad at Magnet, of course, about building more in. There's a really good company called Cat Labs that are doing some really nice discovery software. But what we are missing is what we had back in the early days of forensics, when we had those freely downloadable, fire and, sort of scripted tools that would do that when you don't have the 20 grand tool on your desk. And there are just hardly any cryptocurrency oriented discovery tools around that a police, a forensics lab or an individual investigator can just download and run, and it will find Bitcoin addresses and Ethereum addresses or carved seed words, private keys, and things like that. So if anyone fancies having a bit of a write, there's a real gap in the freeware market for that at the moment. And so, yeah, we need that, and we could really do with the forensics community sort of stepping up and realizing that there's crypto now used in every single criminal category. And the discovery tools for phones and hard drives are really not very good, or very good but very expensive.
Yeah, I predict a student MSc project on that in the future from me.
What, do you know, they can reach out. If anyone wants to work on that, I mean, you know, I have just about every sort of greppable, you know, for almost every cryptocurrency on the planet. And so, you know, I certainly could. I'm not a great programmer. I don't know about you, Simon. I'm a bit of a tinkerer. You know, I can sort of put something together, but it's a bit crap, if I'm honest.
So my code is somewhat like my Russian. My wife's Russian and or was Russian, and not anymore. But I can listen to it and I can understand what she's saying. But if I could try and construct a sentence, I will A, mispronounce it, B, structure it wrong, and probably say something horribly offensive. And that's why I like my programming. I can read other people's code, and I can make sense of what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
But if I sit down and try and structure myself, it turns out to have the wrong grammar and to be spelt wrong.
It's just a world of errors, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's absolutely right.
So my code writing is very limited. Scripting, like you say, you know, grep and command line stuff, I'm quite familiar with. I've been Unix sysadmin before I was anything else. So, you know, stringing together commands, that's fine. That's not programming. That's just...
Yeah. Although actually, I always feel that anyone that can write regular expressions has something just slightly wrong with them.
Yeah, no, that is true. There is a slightly deranged, unhinged thing in getting a good regular expression.
Go, I can write a regular expression for that.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be able to do that. That's not a life skill that should be a good thing. But,
I think the thing that put me off to start with was when I was so back as a sysadmin. It was like, you know, can you write a regular expression to parse an email address? And the answer is no, you can't. It's not possible, because the way that email addresses are structured just means it's not possible to actually. And you're like, okay, this makes no sense at all. I can't do it. It's fine. You know, I've got the book up here. It's
was it anything at anything dot
I'm say
anything?
Said and awkward. Yeah. It's like, I've got the grep one kicking around somewhere as well for, like, you know, the reference, because you can't do without them. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I mean, first of all, the next person in the Forensic Focus forum that asks, has anybody got any suggestions for an MSc project? You've heard it here first.
And put them in touch with me, seriously, or reach out. I mean, just Nick Furneaux on LinkedIn, and, you know, send me a connection request and DM me about it, or reach out to Simon with my email address or something. But, you know, I'm more than happy to help and support, because we really do need these discovery tools. And this, as I say, this is no disrespect to Axiom, to Cat Labs, who are doing some really good stuff, but not everyone in the world can drop, you know, 4 digits on a tool. And so, you know, back to the old sort of freeware tools that we all used to enjoy. And don't get me wrong, I'm not sure you can always go to court on this stuff, but at least it's a starter for 10 in an investigation, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and you can start to get funding if you've got something to follow up on, and nothing else.
That is absolutely right. And, you know, and this, well, I mean, we all know this stuff. This is back to, you know, not being able to go to court and the judge says, how did you find that JPEG? And you said, I've absolutely no idea. FTK did it for me. You know, you still have to be able to sort of recreate key findings. We can't just rely on the old big red button. And so actually some of these tools that maybe just use regular expressions that we can actually look at, and we can reconstruct or write an end script or something to say, well, look, I wrote a tool which extracted that and we found it at this offset and so on. You know, you do need that. You know, and again, that is in no way dissing. I think tools like Axiom, which are, you know, fabulous and need to be in every lab that can afford them.
Yeah. I mean, is there a reason that it's this way? I mean, is it? I mean, I'm going to say conjecture as a whole, but, you know, is it change of pace in cryptocurrency? Is it just the lack of knowledge of it? Is it the unfamiliarity? I'm going to say you were saying about we're not finding it, and well, yeah, that's because you're not looking for it. And somebody said the same to me. A friend of mine was like, you know, no, it's like nobody ever finds steganography. Well, it's like, who's looking for steganography? Nobody's looking for it. It doesn't mean it's not there.
There's plenty of detectors you can download online, but who the hell is ever doing it?
Yeah.
It was interesting actually when I used to write some of the covert tools, I can say this because they're not in circulation anymore with those agencies, but there was always this really, really big question as to should we be removing the USB entry from the appropriate registry keys? And it was quite interesting, actually, that I had a three-letter person once say to me, actually, if we do the broader job right, that covert method of entry job right, there is no reason why anyone would ever look.
Yeah.
If we do that covert method of entry badly, then they might go, right, we need to do a complete forensic analysis of the computer and see if anybody has touched it. But the reality is, I know how to pull registry keys off the computer to my right to see if anyone has ever put anything in it that I don't know about. And I've never, ever done it. And so, as Windows moved on, it became very, 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 very difficult to actually remove entries from some registry keys and not have the operating system drop it back in again. And eventually, they were like, don't worry. We don't think anybody will ever, ever, ever look. And if you just call it generic USB, I mean,
exactly.
But so I think sometimes, we think these things are security issues, then they're not really, depending on the opponent to whom you are, sort of giving your attention. But your question was more around the, why don't these tools exist? And I think the problem is that cryptocurrencies are considered to be a track and trace issue. And I'm don't get me wrong, the Met now have a sort of a cryptocurrency team, and NCA and others, they have their trained people. But that is very much related to following funds on the blockchain, tracing through contracts, through mixers, all this specialist stuff. And we do need those skills. But it comes back to the fact that if you haven't found it in the first place, then that job can't be done. And it hasn't traditionally been seen. I'm going to quickly go back. When I wrote Investigating Cryptocurrencies in 2018, I wrote it for forensics people because cryptocurrency has got the word crypto in it from cryptography. So I assumed that it would absolutely be all my buddies at F3 that would be going, yes, we need to get into this cryptography related to currency thing and understand how elliptic curve cryptography worked and, and all the maths around it. And actually I've proven to be utterly and completely wrong. One of the reasons for the second book, actually. Because the reality is the people that are investigating this stuff are the financial investigators, because they recognize money laundering schemes and they recognize it in banking. And actually the patterns are very similar when you're looking on a blockchain. They recognize how the financial things work within an investment scam. So we started teaching digital forensics people. Then I began noticing around sort of 2019 that there were all these people sat at the back with their arms crossed when we were doing some Python scripting, and they were all the financial investigators. When we got to the track and trace stuff, they were just on fire. They were all over it. And so I think the problem has been nobody has sat down with the forensic teams around the world and said, you need to have some tools that discovers crypto. A really good example, actually, there was a drug dealer that had been under surveillance in central London, true story, about 3 years ago. And they eventually moved in for the arrest. So there'd been surveillance on him. They'd seen the deals go on, and they'd seen the sort of the supply deals happening. And when they moved on the guy, they expected him to have around £40,000 in cash on him. When they lifted him, he had nothing, or anecdotally, 10 quid in his wallet. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So his phone is seized, the house is done, computer seized, that sort of thing. The phone is only because a Metropolitan Police mobile phone investigator looked at an app on the phone and went, what is that? Google eyes. Oh, it's a cryptocurrency app. We're able to get into it, £250,000 worth of crypto. And they realized that actually all of the deals were being done phone to phone, crypto to crypto. And when he was doing cash deals, he was then popping into, well, we haven't got them now because of the FCA, but we're popping into the local corner shop to the ATM, the Bitcoin ATM, chucking the cash in, paying the 17% or whatever it was, and then just moving it up the line. Suddenly, cryptocurrencies were involved in street level drug dealing, which rolls us into the title of the book, There's No Such Thing as Cryptocrime, because is that drug dealer a cryptocurrency criminal. No, he's not. He's facilitating his criminal enterprise by empowering crypto to do that job. And we just haven't caught up on the discovery. It is still individual forensic investigators going, I don't know what that is, and going and doing the job. But I think we're missing private keys. I think we're missing, because that then takes us to the third part of an investigation, that if we can then find those funds and we see an off-ramp, we can freeze and seize, which means we actually get money back, either for the public purse or, most importantly, for victims.
Yeah.
And we're not doing a good job of that at the moment.
No, I know. It is that knowledge. It is that awareness and the full process of it. I'm going to say I do have your book, and I was reading through it, and it struck me, and it was this beautiful quote at the very, well, I won't say the very beginning. It's on page 36, so it's a little way in. But you're quoting from King Solomon's Mines, and more importantly, Ecclesiastes. Sorry, my biblical knowledge is a bit loose on once it's a bit abbreviated. But Shakespeare. But what has been will be. Sorry, what has been is what will be, and what has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun, and. So, I mean, honestly, so rarely. I mean, I came into computer forensics. My desire to get into computer forensics was to do with. I read. I talk about it often enough, so people will know this. But A Cuckoo's Egg by Cliff Stoll.
Oh yeah.
Which is about, effectively, it's a hacking thing. Okay, it was hacking for the purposes of espionage, but it was computer crime, and the only computer crime that really exists is hacking. Although that's usually done for some purpose other than
some other purpose,
purpose, it is that, and the more I've done forensic cases and worked over time, it's drug dealing, it's crimes against the person, it's murder or you follow that rabbit hole down. There isn't anything really that people are doing now that wasn't done 1,000 years ago. By someone to someone. It was just they were doing it with a pen and paper, and now they're doing it with with a computer. And I was going to say, we're watching for those in the UK will have heard of Wolf Hall. Those of you who aren't in the UK may have heard of Wolf Hall, because it's been doing very well. It's an adaptation of a book by Hilary Mantel about Henry VIII and one of his advisors, Thomas Cromwell. But one of the reasons of the expected downfall of Cromwell is that he presented Henry VIII with a painting of his wife, or his wife-to-be, that was a little too photoshopped. And when she turned up, apparently she didn't match particularly well, and this pissed Henry off, which fundamentally undermined his belief and trust in his advisor, which then resulted in... But, you're talking about Photoshop and forgery of things. In his case, in order to get a match which suited his Protestant views versus the Catholicism
in
at the
1500.
Time. In 1500.
Photoshopping in 1500. Brilliant.
Exactly. It's astonishing, isn't it? And you're like, well, okay, so there isn't anything new. And it's just another tool in the arsenal of somebody who wishes to carry out a crime.
Yeah, I said in a conference the other day, actually, that, if you receive a phishing text trying to get you to, supply some sort of details for something, or, is that a telephone crime? Well, it's not. It's a mechanism. Now, the reason why this is important is that there are an awful lot of countries around the world that are siloing cryptocurrency teams. Right, so we train these people in track and trace of crypto assets, and then, like we used to do with forensics people in putting them in the broom cupboard, generally. I don't know if you ever went to Avon and Somerset Police back in the day, but they were literally in this long old broom cupboard, and siloing them. And that is a mistake, because there is never a cryptocurrency crime. And there is a mistake that we miss stuff. So an example I often use, sorry if people have heard it before, but we've had a couple of cases now where sort of known cryptocurrency traders have been kidnapped, or there was one specifically in London where the guys rocked up at the guy's front door and pistol whipped him and tied him up and forced him to send them all his crypto. is that a cryptocurrency crime? Well, look, let's just step back a minute. These people got to the house somehow. So there's probably going to be some sort of AMPR. There's going to be CCTV in the street. There's going to be doorbell cameras. There's going to be, DNA where they press the doorbell of the house or whatever. And all of that is before you get to the movement of the funds. So siloing cryptocurrency teams is a real mistake. And that mistake stems from thinking that there is something called cryptocurrency crime because it's new and it's shiny and they've been hearing about it on the news and stuff. But it's not. So I'm not saying we shouldn't have specifically trained teams. We should, but they shouldn't be siloed. They should be part of the bigger investigative picture because they only form part of that investigative picture ever. In fact, even if you look at something like like the Mango hack and stuff like that, these sort of hacks against cryptocurrency environments and investment schemes and DeFi schemes, those funds, they use techniques which we've been using hacking techniques like it for years, or market manipulation techniques that have been around in the fiat markets forever. And then they tend to move that, and it then moves into fiat currency and is laundered off from there. So again, it's only part of the bigger picture, only part of the investigative picture. And that was really the reason for calling the book There's No Such Thing as Cryptocrime. Because clearly there are many, 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 many crimes that are related to cryptocurrencies. Almost every type of category actually now we're seeing crypto involved with.
And I'm going to say, we've seen this happen with digital forensics, is that, we were siloed into broom cupboards and occasionally would be handed a laptop. But now everybody carries a computer around with them in their pocket as their mobile phone that's tracking them on GPS. Every murder squad knows that they're going to phone the phone examiner and ask him where this guy's been, because that knowledge has suddenly become more prevalent, and sooner or later there will be a tipping point. But it's material like yours and training and things like that will enlighten the investigating officers to the point that they're going, actually, hang on a sec, let's integrate this. There should, as with running any good team, you should be able to talk and communicate within your specialists and SMEs anyway. That's siloing is an issue of management, and my wife's a project manager, and she would definitely agree that not having SMEs involved in the process of planning something is a guaranteed way to fail a project. So
that's true.
It's the same in an investigation. If you're not going to go and ask your examiner, well, what could we get out of this, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, you're missing a trick. But I've always felt the investigative teams that hold all of those key sort of SMEs very much a way that let's talk about a lot of the sort of the should we call them non-law enforcement agencies, run teams in that way, where they have that group of, they're all sort of polymath to a degree, but they're all SMEs. They all know their specific subjects. And I think investigative teams work like that, extremely well. Investigations are no more, Morse turning up on a scene and flashing his badge and going under the tape and looking at it and going, there is this huge group of specializations now that work into murders. And I think it doesn't make good television. So we get really good TV about forensics, so we get really good TV, but we often have to have the key character solving the crime. And of course, that's just not real. That just doesn't happen. You have these broad teams working multiple cases, working with multiple other teams, and they do their specific bit, and they produce their paperwork and their intelligence pack and their evidence pack for that. And you still get the sort of a Morse character that runs the operation and thing, but he's not the one sort of under the tape looking at it going, and then going off and solving the crime. It's just not a reality. And it's exactly the same with the crypto stuff. Don't see it as a standalone thing. There is no Morse character that can jump online, find the assets and solve the crime. It is part of a team of capability and expertise that can do these types of investigations.
Now, there's a lot of I guess there's a lot of publicity around very specific types of crypto crime at the moment, and there's been a couple of television shows recently, and I wholeheartedly admit that I haven't seen them, but it's the pig fattening, pig killing, pig slaying,
Pig butchering, which is
Thank you.
actually. So I have an argument with. So there is a woman called Erin West who is extraordinary. Look her up on LinkedIn, Google her. So she was assistant district attorney, I think, in California up to just recently, and she is running something called Operation Shamrock, which is a desire really to take down the global scam machine and refocus on getting funds back to victims. She is brilliant. She wrote the foreword to the book, so she's right on top of the book there, but she is doing amazing work. She actually likes the phrase pig butchering because it sounds awful, and it makes it sound really, really sort of really awful and terrible, which it is. I don't like it because pig butchering refers to romance scams, really, fattening up the pig before you slaughter it. And the problem is with people that fall for romance scams is that they're victimized twice. They lose both funds and they lose something of their heart. And I don't say that with like a squishy emotional side to it, but I have seen, I have known people take their own lives on the back of it. I have known people's lives be ruined because they fall in love with these people. They really do. I once sat with a woman who, well, I laid out to her that she was being scammed. Look, you're being scammed. This is all the reasons why. In fact, I even put in an envelope what would happen next. And then when it happened, I said, look at the envelope. You're being scammed. Still sent money to the guy the next day. Because it was heart. And she believed, in fact, she actually then went to the guy and said, are you scamming me? Oh my goodness, no, but actually I haven't told you this, but I'm being scammed. I mean, absolutely. And off it goes. But we're seeing, I was telling this story on a webinar last week, that, we saw just recently a woman, the guy contacts her on social media and they get talking. He's a big strapping Ukrainian guy and he's fighting on the front lines against, the great sort of Russian evil, as he's describing it. And, but of course he's got terrible body armor. He could die at any moment. And so if only he had, £2,000 to be able to buy proper body armor, maybe he would survive to be able to come to the Midlands and whisk her off her feet. And she just fell for the whole thing. But of course, he can't receive money through the bank. There are no banks, of course, which sounds completely reasonable, doesn't it? In Eastern Ukraine, there's no banks open. The only way I can do this is through crypto, and then I can use the crypto to buy a thing. And so she was converting money into crypto through a normal cryptocurrency exchange and sending this money out. And, and she just would, to her family, they figured it out really quick, wouldn't listen to the family. Family got me involved. Could you help? I tried to reason with her. She was not interested at all. Why? Because the heart got involved. But actually, even with not straight romance scams, just our trusting nature. There was a lady who's actually she's a broadcaster, a known name, and had got into an investment, had been making investments with an investment company. Her family again felt she was being scammed, and again just wouldn't believe it. And this was an intelligent, very likable woman. And although she wasn't being taken in by the heart, she really believed that her investment advisor was absolutely on the level. I mean, literally was going to invite him for Christmas dinner. Of course, never got to meet him. And the only way we convinced her is that we did all of the the open source stuff around the back. And we actually got a family member to take her to the address to show that no one was working there of that name. And that, and even then she was like, well, maybe they just used that address. It's extraordinary. And this was an intelligent, hugely likable, otherwise extremely sensible woman, because although it wasn't romance, her heart was now involved in in what she was doing. So yeah, pig butchering, I hate the term, but it's that nasty and it ruins people's lives. But you know what, mate, just to segue on, the problem is now is that a lot of the people that are carrying out these scams are themselves victims. So Aaron West has just come back from the Thai-Myanmar border, where they are building these vast scam farms. I mean, there's cranes up where they are putting four figures of people, human trafficked, into these scam centres, and we've got reports of torture and rape when they don't hit their targets. They're not allowed to leave. Terrible, terrible things happen to these people that are on the phones and on the text and on social media trying to find victims, because if they don't, there's threats against themselves and against their families. So we've now got this bizarre situation where the perpetrators are victims. And where do we start with that? Well, where we start with that, we need people, we need our international agencies to be kicking the right doors in those countries. And we need to be putting armed teams in and taking these places down.
Yeah.
And, showing appropriate care and to the people that are being victimized. So, we're really going off a forensics topic here, but this is
but I mean that is the point, isn't it? Is that we don't operate in a vacuum. We don't much as it's nice to get a nice neat little hard disk and go, oh, this is my job. It's not.
Yeah.
This is at best somebody's life who's been falsely accused, and we can say, okay, no, it wasn't them, or it's somebody who has hurt somebody else in some ways quite horrifically, and could there's a knock-on impact. You're going to be, assuming they are guilty, you're going to be taking someone potentially away, from their parents, from their family, from everything we do has a human impact. And when you're talking about drug dealers or like this, whereby they are running chains of people, money mules, the county lines operations in the UK and the equivalents worldwide of those things, you're talking about huge networks of people who are suffering, certainly being manipulated, certainly being made to do things that are at best without their knowledge and understanding, at worst coerced, physically, violence, and we shouldn't be so blasé to assume that our little forensic examination over here is not impactful in human terms. It's a hugely important field that we're in, and
well, we can't win, Simon. I mean, this is the reality. We're not going to win, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't fight. I use it. I was on the Cease and Desist podcast last week, and I said to them, we're never going to stop the boats coming across the channel. We're just not. No. Someone is always going to get in a boat and try. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be sending, lifeguards out to pull people out of the sea before they die. We should still be trying to save people, even if we're never going to win the overall battle. And I'm pretty apolitical, but I actually feel for whatever government is in power on this particular subject, because, and it's only going to get worse as it becomes harder and harder economically and environmentally to live in sub-Saharan Africa. If we see an extension of conflict, can it extend much more? But more extension of conflict in the Middle East. Of course, the potential for things going worse in Eastern Europe. The movement is only in one direction. The movement is into Northern Europe. And there's no way, no government can stop this. It's all about management. So coming back to actually what we're talking about is that, people are going to run these scam farms because they can make vast amounts of money. Another question, of course, is where are these hundreds of millions going? You can only buy a certain number of Lamborghinis and boats. So one has to start looking up the chain at governments and all the rest of it that are tacitly or actively supporting these things. We know that North Korea has been doing that for years. The vast £500 million, sort of hacks and scams, that rolling into North Korea go to the government there. But I think there are other governments that have somewhat learned from that lesson and realise that they can tap in. They can still leave the scammers with their tens of millions, to sort of wave their dollar bills on social media and have their yacht in Dubai. Actually, let's not talk about Dubai, but the reality is we're never actually going to win. We need people at the high levels going after the governments, trying to get them to play appropriate ball. We need to be taking out the serious organised crimes, and then we need people focusing on the victims and trying to get funds back to them. I feel quite passionate about it.
No, it's very fair, and yes, yeah, it's especially where international law is not. It doesn't currently have the teeth to, deal with this.
Well, we're living in a post-truth world, aren't we? I think it has been said a few times now. And when someone, when you have an American president just, and again, this is not a political point, but just blatantly letting their son off. This wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, would it? Because there would have been this vast uproar, and everyone now just goes, yeah, they're all just doing it. They're all bad as each other, blah blah. But again, I just coming back to the point, we shouldn't not fight just because we're not going to win the bigger battle. Right at the end of my book, actually, I reach out to the scammers, because there will be those that will read this book, of course, to see and there's an awful lot left out, which, a lot of capability that law enforcement have and governments have in this space. But to say, that there are some times that I unravel scams and I'm like, this is blinking brilliant. I mean, it's hard enough to unravel it, but to have come up with it in the first place, I mean, high five, guys, this is
I love cases like that. I mean, obviously you're like, this is horrible, but wow, that was really ingenious.
Yeah, and I'm saying there, some of the work that you are doing to defraud people is hardly short of brilliant. But how do you want to feel about your life? When you are X years old and on your deathbed, that everyone will get to. What do you want to look back and see yourself as a parasite on humanity, or someone that actually did good for others? And some of these people are brilliant, and if they use their powers for good, could make a difference. So there'll be plenty that enjoying their Lamborghinis and their lifestyle, and that's their life choice. But maybe there are some that think, well, actually, maybe there's a better way to use these extraordinary skills. But for some people, they see it as the only way out, and we don't have to agree with that, but we should understand it.
I think it's a mistake to. It's always a mistake. I was going to say, there's a sort of a famous joke in computer security terms, which is if you can't quote Liu Tse's Art of War, you're not doing it right.
Have you ever tried to read it?
It's
really hard reading.
Hard going, isn't it? But it's like, if you don't understand your enemy, or you underestimate your enemy, you have no hope. You're not going to get there. And we are all motivated to do things for a reason. I'm motivated to keep a roof over my head and look after my children and put food on the table. It's just, I can do that here by doing something legitimate. In other countries, that may be a different thing, and it's difficult to judge somebody else whose world you don't understand. And I'm going to say, and again, I mentioned earlier, my wife's Russian. The cultural differences between two countries is vast, even though they are a modern first world developed country. You're talking about huge differences stemming from language and literature and religion and all sorts of things that fundamentally mean that that there are always going to be things that you just don't get as a Brit, as an Englishman. You're like, yeah, okay, fine, yeah, right. And some of these other countries are even further removed than that from us, and what is and isn't acceptable to them, and what is and isn't the norm is hugely away from our level.
Yeah, I mean, what we see as appropriate behaviour.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily make us right and them wrong. And some of this comes back. I watched a conference years ago, and they called it the loaf of bread protocol, and they gave the example of someone like me stealing a loaf of bread, and then the example of a homeless girl, 14 years old, on the streets of London, starving, stealing a loaf of bread. And the law sees it exactly the same. That, I'm walking along with my Apple Watch on, and a nice car in a car park, very fortunate to have a reasonable standard of living. Although I hardly own any crypto, by the way.
I was going to say
it was criminal. But the view, of course, is we would see that poor 14-year-old girl as a victim, and actually stealing the loaf of bread. Well, it's completely understandable. The poor thing is starving. And yet for me to steal the loaf of bread, somehow that would be risible and completely wrong. The reality is the law, because the law is in many ways is useless because it doesn't look at the individual. It just says all bad. So when we look at scammers, we might decide that we look at the guy with the Lamborghini waving his wads of dollars on social media as risible. But actually, the person that is scamming in a scam farm in Southeast Asia under the threat of physical violence, well, it's the same scam, it's the same thing, but it's a different environment, But the law is the law is the law. How do we deal with those things? I mean, we are going way outside my pay grade. Right now.
Yes.
Maybe we just go back to the fact that I never bought crypto when it was $300.
Well, no, I'm going to say this. Yeah, well, yeah, I had a little bit, and I bought whatever it was, Bitcoin, for a few pounds, and I sold it. I made 600 quid, and I was so chuffed.
Chuffed a bit, yeah.
and the acceptance of, if I had just held on to that, I could have retired by now. You just got to let it go, don't you? There's no other way.
I said on the, I think I said on the Cease and Desist podcast last week, which is a good podcast, by the way, it's to do with seizure, it's to do with the other end. So we're at one end, the Cease and Desist podcast is about the other end.
We'll put a link in the show notes so that other
it's
people
a good
can go and
podcast,
listen to it.
actually. And, but I said in there that I read the Bitcoin white paper, and if anyone's a coder out there, honestly, the Bitcoin code is some of the most beautiful code ever written. Never been hacked. It's utterly beautiful. And if you go, of course it's been hacked. It's been hacked millions of times. No, it hasn't. What's been hacked are the systems that have been put around it with the exchanges and social engineering attacks and things like that. The Bitcoin code, never been hacked. Tiny problem in the first year that it came out, but that was solved and it's never had a problem since. It is an amazing thing, the Bitcoin code. But I looked at it and went, conspiracists and criminals. That's who it'll be. And of course, for the first few years, who was using it? But conspiracists and criminals.
Yeah.
Mostly it was preppers and it was criminals thinking this is quite cool. And so when it was at $300, I was like, this is a waste of time. And then a mate of mine called Chris, when it was about $2,500, phoned me in, and he's had a few quid, and he phoned me up. He's like, how much of this Bitcoin should I buy, mate? This stock it's going somewhere. I'm like, dude, don't bother. It's conspiracists and criminals, And when it hit like 60 grand a year ago, he was like, I know we've been near the $100,000, aren't we, at the moment? But he was like, dude, that's the worst advice I've ever been given, ever. And I'm like, mate, don't take investment advice from an investigator. I think it's in the book, actually, that story. Yeah. I've been wrong. I mean, I've been wrong. And I wish anybody that is into crypto as an investment vehicle all the best. I think at the recent high point, I've now got about 10 grand's worth of crypto. Woo! I'm sort of doing fantastically well. But it is one of those things I look back and went, man, why didn't I just buy a dozen when it was $300?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be on the podcast now.
Yeah, well, this is it. I'll be sunning myself on the Bahamas. Yeah. I mean, and I hasten to add, there is no financial advice included in this podcast. And we certainly are making no recommendations in any way, shape, or form. But in terms of crypto, I mean, we've seen Bitcoin come and stay. We have seen Ethereum and Dogecoin, and I mean, there's so many you can't list them.
Oh, thousands, yeah, of tokens, not so much primary coin.
Yeah. Do you think that we will continue to see a plethora of sub things, or do you think it will normalise in the way that we have now, like dollars and pounds, and we'll end up with a stable set of normalised cryptocurrencies?
Oh man, I can rattle on this. I mean, here's the problem. We don't currently have a cryptocurrency because fees are too high. So nobody is holding Bitcoin so that they can go out and buy a few beers tonight. Because no, you know, there is the Lightning Network, which is supposed to let you do that, but no one's using it. It works, don't get me wrong. It's a clever piece of technology which enables you to make transactions at very, very, very low cost on the Bitcoin network. But nobody's using it. So there's no real currency until somebody comes up with a cryptocurrency app that 15-year-olds start using to pay their mate for the vape that he's just bought for them. Bleep, phone to phone. Until that happens, because that's the pattern of all our social media, of course. 15-year-olds started using it, then the parents started using it, and then the 15-year-olds grew up, and now we've got grandmothers on Facebook. That's how that happened. That's how tech tends to be absorbed into the sort of the psyche of community. Someone needs to come up with something that is basically free in transactions, and that can act as a highly secure currency. Now, of course, the people that tried to do it was Facebook. And what happened was the Senate went bonkers, and then the EU went bonkers. Why? Because they realized if every Facebook user changed $10 into the Facebook cryptocurrency, it would be the most powerful currency on the planet by a factor of about 8 or something ridiculous. The almighty dollar would now be very much in second place. So they all went crazy, and Facebook had to step back. However, on the flip side, I don't see it going anywhere. Blockchain technology, if anyone tells you blockchain is complicated, they're trying to sell you something. Blockchain is just a spreadsheet with some crypto tacked onto it. And it's very, very, very effective at having secure transactional record keeping. So I don't think the technology is going anywhere. I think Bitcoin is now a little bit too big to fail. It is an asset class. It is not a currency. People are holding Bitcoin like they do gold now and silver. And I think it will continue to be an asset class. Where that technology goes, I'll be honest, I'm not bothered. I'm an investigator. I don't care. I will only ever be interested when something is being used to carry out some sort of criminality. But I think it's going to go somewhere. I think it's going to continue to be a thing. And I think someone's going to suddenly hit the viral market. You know, a lot of currencies are talking about having like the e-pound, aren't we? And the e-dollar and this sort of thing. That's pointless. That's just a sop to the public that want to think they're using some sort of cryptocurrency. That's rubbish. I mean, there's no reason for it really. And I think any company that tried to globally have a cryptocurrency that people started to use globally, they would just be stomped on by every legislature that realizes that they're losing control of finance within their country. The US can't allow the dollar to be trumped by a social media network with its own currency. So I'm not seeing a global currency at the moment, but I think this is here to stay. And you know, crime pays, if you know what I mean. So crime pays for both the criminals and for the investigators. You know, I'm very fortunate. I'll continue to make a perfectly pleasant living, to put a roof over the head of my family. Because the reality is that I don't think the criminals are going anywhere anytime soon. And we'll continue to play that tit and tat game. They'll continue to come up with awesome schemes that I'll look at on my computer and go, boom. And, you know, if a scammer is watching this, you know, you do some cool stuff. But the problem is the victims at the other end are decent, ordinary people, and use your powers for good.
So on that note, we're coming to the top of the hour. I didn't realise that the top of the hour was an American expression. Somebody pointed this out the other day.
Oh, everything's an American expression now.
We invented the language.
I think an Americanism of some description.
But yes, so we've been chatting for an hour, which is the time we have. It's been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it. So I'm going to say, on the note that cryptocurrency isn't going anywhere, I would recommend Nick's book. I'm not far into it, but I've done the thing that everybody who's about to plan to do an interview does, which is flick through it, open random pages, try and find something to catch the interviewee out on, and it's all very well written and very very interesting, and I'd thoroughly recommend it. And also, as you pointed out, you've pulled in several other people to not fill out. I mean, that's not the right word to say.
No,
but to include information.
You only know what you know, Simon. I realised that there were some aspects, like to do with sanctions avoidance and things like that. I just didn't have expertise in. So I'm very fortunate now to know some really, really good people in the space. So I've been able to pull in, world leaders in this world in order to provide contributions. So the guy who was running crypto for the MPCC has done a thing on running crypto teams, and Ari Redboard, who was ex-Department of Justice, now at TRM Labs that I work with part-time, he wrote the section on sanctions avoidance, and Aaron West wrote the foreword. Carol House, who's at the White House, head of cyber and that sort of thing at the White House, wrote the outro. So some really great people in there that brought their expertise to fill the holes where you only know what you know.
Yeah,
so
you know what you know.
You can't pretend to know everything.
No, but I mean, it's a great book, and I thoroughly look forward to getting through the rest of it. And thank you for agreeing to come on and talk about it. Yeah. I was, and again, as you do before you interview someone, you have a look at the LinkedIn profile, and I noticed that you live, fortunately, in Beer.
I do. Little fishing village in East Devon with a great name, and it's felt like the drink as well.
I know.
We've got a pub here called the Barrel of Beer, and you can get a T-shirt that says, "I've had a beer in the barrel of beer in beer. It's got to be done." So I'm very fortunate. I sit here and I can see the sea. It's very, very beautiful. And I pass 3 pubs and a wine bar in the 400 meters from here to the beach. So it's a great.
So the bit at the back that says you enjoy running is a little bit of a misnomer. Oh yeah, running at the cliff tops of South Devon.
Which I did this morning, actually.
Run down via the pubs to the beach.
Yeah, wine bar, then the dolphin, then the barrel of beer, then the anchor. Actually, in that order. So, but no, it is. I was out running over the cliffs this morning, and it's a very, very beautiful place to be. I feel very fortunate to be here.
Well, I'm very happy for you, and it's a great place to be running your cryptocurrency investigations from, and long may it last for you.
Indeed.
Thank you very much for joining us. For the podcast listeners, you can find us on all the places that you can find podcasts, and if you've ever listened to this podcast before, you'll know that I'm going to remember none of them. LinkedIn, yeah, actually we do post on LinkedIn, but I was thinking Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, all of the good stuff, but most importantly on the Forensic Focus website we will put through a whole bunch of links to Nick's book, to the cease and desist SCIZE Cease and Desist podcast that Nick was on the other day, and you can have a listen to the final end of that, because obviously we're more loaded to the front end of the cryptocurrency process. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. Lovely to see you again.
It's been fun to be on.
All right. So all the best. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks.